This is episode number 118 of the Guns Magazine podcast. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent T. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. First, before we get started, let's have a quick chat about our sponsor, Luth-AR. Luth-AR is home of the NBA buttstocks, which are affordable, lightweight, fully adjustable buttstocks for your AR-15 fixed and collapsible rifles. But that's not all. Luth-AR is your one-stop shop for build kits, replacement parts, and custom accessories, including the chubby grip, palm hand guards, oversized switch safety, and paddle bolt catch. Luth-AR is proudly made in the USA, and with 4 decades of experience, will continue their mission of innovate to dominate with high-quality products for your ARs. Find out more at Luth-AR.com. Today, I get the pleasure of introducing Erick Gelhaus. Many of you already know Erick, as I've interviewed him twice already on the podcast, but today, he's officially being introduced as the new editor of AmericanCop.com. Then, after we talk about that, Erick and I discuss a pretty important topic in America today, the state of cops and crime in 2022. Now here's Erick Gelhaus. Well, good afternoon, Erick.
Good afternoon, Brett.
Well, I normally would say something like, how are you? But I already know how you are. It doesn't sound good. Are you going to live?
I think so. The COVID test was negative this morning. Okay. It's over a week after I got back from SHOT Show. It's not the show vid. I think it may just be getting sick at the wintertime.
Okay. Well, we'll try to forge through here. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about this, but this is a pretty important topic and one that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is the current state of law enforcement in the United States and how we got to this point. But first, as they say, let's talk about you are now part of the FMG family. You are the new editor of AmericanCop.com, a property that we restarted here about a year ago, and we are excited to bring you on board as editor. Now, judging by the name, you would think it's purely a law enforcement site, and it is very heavily law enforcement focused, but what I think is really cool about it is the fact that our mission is not just law enforcement, but citizens that are concerned and want to support law enforcement, want to know more about law enforcement, and also many of the tips, techniques, tricks, gear reviews can also apply to, as we say, real earth people and folks that are not in law enforcement. So really, our target audience there is any concerned and prepared American. And that's where I'm excited about you being the editor. You've got a pretty wide background, both in law enforcement, military, and as a real earth person. So talk about a little bit of your vision as we go forward with American Cop.
I am looking at this more along the vein of the old SWAT magazine. So the title kind of suggested law enforcement, but it was there for everyone. Law enforcement and I call them decent, normal human beings, right? Citizens want to be prepared and take care of themselves. So that's there. I do want to, as we kind of develop and get our feet underneath us, start going back and resurrecting one of the things out of the old Police Marksman magazine, which was event debriefs or deconstructions. This had a tragic outcome. What happened? What can we learn from it? And it won't just be law enforcement events. I'm going to hope that we can get in some ones involving the public too. Hey, this had a bad outcome or a negative outcome. What along the way could have changed things, right? So there's that. There's going to be equipment reviews. Some of it will be very specific to the quote tactical community. I prefer to say practical and avoid the T word, but the tactical community. Others will be kind of broader, more focused on everybody in general, right? Yeah. So the first email announcement for articles on the website since I became the editor went out this morning. First article was on preparedness and survival kits packed into your vehicle as a result of the I-95 mess in Northern Virginia during a snowstorm at the start of the year.
Right.
That's not just cop stuff, though cops were stuck out in it. That's everybody who lives where there's weather.
Exactly.
The second article up was on that new bolt carrier for the AR, which is kind of interesting, and it does solve a problem. But that's not just a cop thing. That's not just a mill thing. In fact, it's probably more a citizen thing because they're in a position to change out parts inside of their ARs, whereas law enforcement in the military isn't necessarily.
Right.
Third article, when I wrote my experience starting to shoot competition again. That's not specific to any one paycheck. It's you're thinking with a gun in your hand, you're trying to solve a problem that somebody else designed. So I'm hoping that we can hit things that are applicable across the board, that work for everybody and keep everyone interested. And even if it's not maybe specific to you, you could at least go, hey, that might work for my buddy Fred. Yep,
exactly. And that's, again, was my goal when we brought you on board. We want to see that pretty wide tent because I love I'm going to steal that. We're not talking the tactical community. We're talking the practical community because that's exactly what it is. Folks that don't believe our beneficent Uncle Joe or whomever is going to take care of us. I mean, they might to some degree, but we're responsible for ourselves. And that's the community we belong to and we preach to. And hopefully we can all be better because of it. So whether you're a cop or not, check out AmericanCop.com with Mr. Erick Gelhaus, our new editor. So officially welcome aboard, even though you've been on Gun Cranks, our video series, and that went off the rails real quick, but it was fun if you haven't checked out the Gun Cranks episode live from the SHOT Show. So, but moving...
Birth control for deer is a deer right.
Okay, I wasn't going to bring that up, but fast forward to that, check out Erick's face when I say that, and it was a pretty entertaining episode.
It was.
So, now on to the main event. We've had the cartoons, I suppose. It's time for the main movie to come on. And just a side note, do they still do that? I haven't been to a movie in a couple of years. They still show cartoons beforehand?
No, it's ads. Okay. It's ads for local businesses, and it's ads for stuff at the snack bar.
Okay. Well, that shows you how long. It may have been, say, 15 years since I've been to a movie. I don't like sitting in the dark with people. But anyway, this is something, as I said in the beginning, near and dear to my heart. It's the topic of law enforcement in America and what's wrong with law enforcement in America. And frankly, I think we have a great responsibility here. We're both retired law enforcement. We've both been through our various adventures in our life. One of yours that we covered on the first podcast you were on was how you got tarred and feathered after a shooting, and it was completely undeserved, in my opinion. And that didn't get in the way of anybody stopping to think about it. But you were kind of the national poster boy there for a few days, and longer than that, actually. But I mean, you were on the national news there for a while, so you've experienced it firsthand. But now, suddenly, the entire profession of law enforcement has come under fire from a significant part of our country. But yet, crime is up, and murders are up, and people are going, now, what's going on here? Well, let's talk about that. So, starting out just as a general overview, I mean, where do you think we're at in this country in regards to our law enforcement?
So, some of the things that law enforcement's at fault for, we have not done a good job of educating the community. And I'm not even talking press conferences or citizens police academies. There's a whole lot of folks who just don't understand what we do, why we do it, how we do it.
At all.
At all. I swear nobody teaches constitutional law, awareness of the Constitution in schools, statutory law, case law, why we do what we do. Ultimately, we work for the public. So one of the other retired cops who's a peer of mine, who's on the training circuit out there, Chuck Haggard, talks about municipalities, localities, counties get the cops they deserve. You get what you pay for. You get what you ask your police department to provide. So that's one concern. If the public's not engaged, if they don't know what's going on and why, then that's one set of problems. One of the things that I've seen, it's been interesting to watch the progressions of some of the higher up individuals in law enforcement. And I'm going to use George Gascon as both a good example and later on as a bad example. There was a shooting in San Francisco when Gascon was the chief of the city there. It involved an individual in a wheelchair who'd stabbed some people. Ultimately, when he gets encountered by the cops, he pushes himself upright in the wheelchair, throws the knife at the officers. This was pre-body worn camera era, so any of the video footage was shot by people with cell phones from across the street. That cell phone footage hit the local news pretty quickly, and Gascon and the whole police department came under fire by it. He gave a press conference the next morning, walking everybody through the whole event and the footage. He had one of his use of force instructors there who, if Gascon got a fact wrong or misstated something, that dude was sliding in a 3x5 card, correcting the misstatement. And I've got the video. It's amazing to see it done.
That is amazing.
And Gascon corrects it. Now, this is the guy who went on to become the district attorney of San Francisco and pretty much throw out any penalty for criminals.
Yeah.
And now he's down at Los Angeles doing the damage to all of LA County that he's doing down there.
Wow.
When I was in grad school, and my thesis was on communicating the legitimacy and frequency of police use of force, I contrasted Gascon's press conference in that shooting with one given by the chief of Ferguson, Missouri, a week after Officer Darren Wilson was attacked and had to shoot Michael Brown. You look at that press conference by the chief. It wasn't the investigation being conducted by Ferguson, but the chief's giving a press conference a week into it, and he doesn't know the facts of the case, and he's bouncing all over.
Yeah,
and he's trying to refer to notes, and he's doing a very poor job of it. I won't say that was the first event, but that was where a lot of people spun to it, where they looked at the outcome, not what led up to it.
Yeah.
So we've got that, right? So that's not getting communicated. The other thing is, and I'm going to quote of another peer of mine who's a cop down in Southern California, and I don't know if this was his line or if he got it from somebody else. Modern law enforcement doesn't have an institutional racism problem. Modern law enforcement has an institutional undertraining problem. It's one thing to go sit in a class for 4 hours on whatever subject you want. It's another to put the practical application and decision-making side of that under stress.
Yeah.
Going to the range, as long as you have one, you can pull it off with 2 instructors for 10 to 20 people. It may not be great interaction, but that's training. It's better if I can put somebody on a video scenario and pay for, one of these aftermarket video trainers with a couple instructors in there working with them, and I can run people through the exact same scenario over and over and over again. That tests your decision-making with a firearm in the hand, but there's not necessarily any consequences to that. To do good simulation training where you're interacting with other people, now I need trainers, I need safeties, I need role players, and we don't have acceptable casualties in law enforcement, but we know when we start putting our hands on each other on the mat and wrestling around, we're going to have some injuries.
Yep.
So we've got to have enough people to backfill behind Fred or Steve if they dislocate a shoulder or sprain a knee during that training, right?
Yep.
And if we can't do those things because we don't have the bodies to staff that and absorb it, then the training that's actually most applicable, we're not going to get to. That's another small part of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think you did a good job of explaining some of the things that as a profession we could do better. Let's look at the other side of it now. What has happened in this country that we are being vilified, even in places where we're not hearing stories of misuse of authority? I had a very eye-opening experience with a younger person from my local area who said that her friends were afraid to go out because of the police. And I'm like, so why is her little friends afraid to go out and deal with the local police department? What that is just subscribing to television news and social media and the narrative. And if it's happening in my community, it's happening everywhere in the world. I mean, in America.
It was, and this is one study I don't have, and I don't know why I don't have it, so I can only kind of hit it at a wave top level. But they went out and asked a bunch of folks, okay, how many cops, how many people of this ethnicity are shot a year by the cops? And it's some incredible number. How often? There was one that was quoted last week, I heard. It involved a number of college students. How often do officers use deadly force in their encounters. And these were college kids, so you would think they're getting some level of education.
You would think.
It's just not the right one.
Yeah.
Who believe that, in no small part based on commercial television or entertainment television, that we're using deadly force in 1 out of every 5 events.
Jeez.
Well, but if you look at entertainment television,
that's how it is.
Cop show,
yeah.
with the exception of Hill Street Blues and maybe Barney Miller, for those of us old enough to remember those. An event happens, there's a shooting of some sort, they go do whatever, and they're back on the street within a few minutes. There's no report writing about using force to restrain somebody, take them into custody. There's none of the interviews. There's none of the several month process while a shooting is adjudicated that may see you not in the office or stuck in the office, as opposed to out on the street or working, doing whatever you're doing, whatever you're assigned to. That's not shown. So if the only place to get some idea of what the cops are doing is the entertainment media, then nobody's seeing anything accurate.
Yeah. I've often said countless times that people have two perceptions of police officers. Big city cops are involved in a shooting, a stabbing, and a car chase every single shift. And smaller communities outside the big city, they carry one bullet in their pocket because they're Barney Fife. And neither is accurate at all. But that, I think, covers the majority of opinion of law enforcement in this country.
It's unfortunate because the media has driven it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a very specific, very directed movement to crush local policing.
Yeah.
There are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the country, give or take. And you'll hear people say, well, there's 18,000 different policies. Well, yeah, my policy number for use of force may be a different policy number than an agency 4 counties away. But we're both law enforcement agencies in the state of California, in the Ninth Circuit in the United States. So we work under the same case law, statutory law for what we do. There may be, the comma may be in a different place, or the word imminent versus immediate may be in there. But they're going to essentially be the same policies. And your deadly force rules in Indiana were probably pretty darn close to my deadly force rules out in California.
Exactly.
There may be different judges' opinions on to some very narrow specific things, but folks don't understand that. You know, they talk about there's no national standard for this, that, or the other thing. Yeah, there is.
Yeah, there is.
It's called case law. It comes from the United States Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Or it comes from the circuit courts for several states that lays out what we can do when we can do it. And a lot of it's got a tremendous amount of common sense to it, which is why you see movements to do away with case law like Graham versus Connor, which says it comes down to objective reasonableness. And if there hasn't been a case law decision telling the cops that you couldn't do that, if they were objectively reasonable based on what they knew at the time of the event, then that's probably going to be okay.
Yep. And that goes to something that makes cops crazy. And if you get more than 2 together and they start talking, especially about use of force, it's this whole concept of Monday morning quarterbacking. And we have entire industries now, you know, literally the sports talk industry is devoted to Monday morning quarterbacking, but now that's become a favored pastime in law enforcement. And tragically, and again, as you have experienced, now it's not just enough to say, yeah, this person acted within policy and customary procedure and all that. Now they're really drilling down into, and they're not even looking at the objective facts. And then you throw the media into it, and they just draw whatever conclusion is the spiciest to get the most clicks or views.
Yes. And
it creates this whole firestorm. But talk a little bit about what Monday morning quarterbacking is doing to law enforcement.
I think, and that's going to be kind of a overarching theme here, right? And the thought process could be wrong. There's a looking at outcome, not enough of a look at what led up to stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if the outcome is the suspect, the bad guy, ended up deceased, then automatically it was bad and the cops failed. Agencies, when they say, like, we need to look into what went wrong in this event, are driving that. There may have been absolutely nothing that went wrong in that event on the officer's end. There may have been everything that went wrong on the bad guy's side of things. But if agencies are talking about what went wrong, then the perception is that the cops screwed it up. Not understanding enough about physical skill sets, limitations, hours worked, prior events. If you haven't dealt with some of the folks with extreme mental health issues or self-medication issues on some non-commercially available pharmaceuticals.
What a nice way of saying that.
Illegal drugs, yes.
Yeah.
But if you're not paying attention to that, right, you don't necessarily understand some things.
Well, I'm going to say this real plain, and I'd never do this during my career because you worry about saying things like this, but I can say it now. And that's the fact that anybody that's dealt with people, especially people in crisis, you know, whether you've fought in a war, you know, or emergency services, things like that, there are just a few folks out there that just flat probably need to be shot. And I know that's not a very politically popular, you know, kind of statement, but they're out of the human society. There's just some folks that are so nasty and they do such bad, terrible things that occasionally if you run across them, it's going to happen. And the idea of a police officer never using lethal force against somebody, at least in our current society, is absolutely freaking ludicrous. And for people to say that we need to cut back our shootings are already back to a bare minimum. And to think that we'll ever have a world where less lethal, non-lethal, or just compliance and rainbows and unicorns will solve the problem, you're stupid and you don't understand people. Can I say it any more plain than that?
No, that was pretty accurate. The amount of cops, officers, deputies, state troopers, whatever you want to call them, that have been in and continue to be in positions where they could legitimately use deadly force and haven't, and have found other ways to solve that problem, usually by hazarding themselves, putting themselves or others around them at risk by not using deadly force, is huge. The FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin, which is a bi-monthly publication of the FBI, has a study in there years back. And they looked at a bunch of officers like in the Maryland, Delaware area. And Baltimore, Maryland's pretty much a mess. That's a very violent area. But they looked at officers, I want to say it was from those two states. And on average, of the ones that used deadly force, they could think of specifically 5 events with sufficient detail to describe them where they didn't use deadly force. They knew they could, but they didn't use it.
Yep.
And I think in a lot of places, the numbers are a lot higher. And this goes to law enforcement failing. And I don't want to keep beating up on law enforcement, but there are things we can do better. What we were reporting to the FBI and the uniform crime reports was about 450 to 500 fatal shootings a year. In the aftermath of Ferguson, Missouri, you had a couple newspapers who took on this task of let's actually start finding all the data by combing media searches. Washington Post has got probably the best database out of that, which is sad that it's a media source, not a government source.
Yeah.
But they're showing us somewhere pretty consistently between 980 and about 1020 fatal shootings a year out of a population of over 330 million. Now, I'd like to know what the total number of shootings are, right? Shooting and missing, shooting and hitting and wounding.
Right.
It's going to give us a lot better idea about our decision making. But 1,000 fatal shootings a year out of numbers that high with everything we're seeing, that's not an epidemic. That's not a pandemic.
No.
When you start busting down and looking at the numbers of who gets shot and why, and the problem becomes, what's your definition of unarmed? You trying to rip the gun out of a cop's holster. Well, you're unarmed. No, you're not.
Yeah.
You're running over people. You're unarmed. No, you're not. We're trying to sanitize what somebody with a weapon is. And the numbers just don't support a lot of the outrage. And there's a Harvard economist that's done some pretty good work on race-based use of force, showing conclusively that deadly force is not getting used out of the norms when you look at how races and involvement in violent crime breaks down. He's got some other work about non-deadly force out there that needs to be looked at. But what's the behavior? Washington State University is looking at officer decision-making when they're fatigued and exhausted. And race is not part of the problem. I've got other studies that I'm going to be doing a presentation on end of March that go and specifically looking at its behavior and the nature of the encounter far more than how the bad guy came out of the paint shop and the body shop.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned Baltimore, and I think that's a good place because that one is frequently cited as their murder rate exploded. Law enforcement stops went down, and you still have media going, why is that? Well, let me explain something to you very simply. If you're John Q or Susie Q cop driving down the street, and if you stop that person of a different race and they're doing something or they're not doing something, because sometimes we investigate and it turns out to be everything's cool. Regardless, if you're in a situation where 40 people pull out their cell phones and 20 of them are screaming obscenities at you, and the person you're dealing with suddenly starts acting the same way, and if you end up making an arrest or using force, it's going to be scrutinized to the nth degree, and there's a good possibility you might be criminally charged, even if you didn't do something, but you were standing there while another cop did. Why would you engage in proactive policing? I think we've all been there on a bad day. It's like, I'm not arresting anybody unless they commit murder on the hood of my car. Well, folks, let me tell you what. My brother and sister officers out there, they're still fighting crime, but you know what? A lot of them are saying, unless it's on the hood of my car, I ain't going to do it. And can you blame them?
No, you can't. And you brought up the people videotaping, taking pictures of stuff, influencing people. You will start to see, I saw it when I was working, you would start to see people playing for the camera.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And what I would tell folks is, tape us all day long. I don't care.
Yeah.
We've got cameras too. Look, right here, center of my chest. It's recording everything. But do me a favor. Go down the street and record us. Because if you think we're doing something nefarious, we're doing something evil, we're doing something wrong, do you think we're going to do it when you're right in front of us videotaping us?
Yeah.
I said, but the other problem is that dude's playing to you. He's playing to your camera. And he's trying to jack everybody up. And that creates a whole separate problem that's going to make this thing go a whole lot worse. If you think that we're going to do horrible stuff, go down the street. Was it Arizona or Texas that was just talking about having pushing a bill through that was going to say you can't be within 15 feet of the officers and videotape?
Yeah.
Thank you. Don't criminalize videotaping. Don't, please, for the love of God, if you work for me, don't go try to arrest the dude videotaping you because he's got a right to do it.
Sure.
But just ask him to stay out of the immediate event so we can get stuff done and it doesn't jack up the guy or gal we're dealing with.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know when in all of this that proactive policing became a bad word, that people wanted us to start acting like firemen. And God bless firemen. They have the reclining chair. They have, the big screen TV and the amazing kitchens. But there have been studies going back decades that cops on the street in a car interacting with the public cuts down crime.
Yeah, pretty simple.
And folks aren't likely, it seems, some of the folks that are criminally involved aren't likely to be out doing criminal stuff if they know there's a really good chance they're going to get pulled over, stopped, their probation or parole conditions, if they have them, are going to be found. And that's going to lead to a search of the vehicle. And if you know that you might get stopped for the taillight and you might get searched because you or your buddy's on parole, you're probably not going to be rolling down the street with a gun. But once things get to the point where the cops aren't pulling over folks for the broken taillight, or you're telling them don't pull them over for the broken taillight, and you're telling them not to enforce probation conditions and not to do vehicle searches, then those 2, 3, 4 bad guys in that car that are out trying to put in work for whoever their air quotes employer is, be that Pachuco Loco or whoever, take your pick, then nobody's going to stop them from doing it. And now when they find somebody who either is in the criminal subculture where it's part of their life, or it's a decent, normal human being who just got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, there's a whole lot less pressure on them that could have prevented that from before.
Yeah.
But if you want us to wait, hey, we can be reactive. We'll wait until that shooting happens, that beating or stabbing happens, then we'll go out and try to figure it out. But if we're not out talking to the folks involved in that stuff, then we got a lot less information that we can use to solve that crime when it happens.
Well, I think you made a great point that in some locations, that's exactly what's happening. Squads are sitting on station or sitting at the local diner. And yes, we will go answer our calls, but that's all we're going to do. And how often in your career did you show up at anything and the guy that did it is standing there going, I did it. Go ahead and take me to jail. It doesn't work. That's not how the game's played.
Not a lot of those.
Yeah. So I guess to summarize in the time we got left here, we do get, as you pointed out in the beginning, you do get the law enforcement you deserve. So it's time for what I believe is the silent majority in this country to stand up and say enough is enough. We always want our law enforcement officers to be the best trained, polite, courteous, all those good things, those positive attributes of a professional law enforcement officer. But if you're going to hamstring them and vilify them and do everything you can to make them the bad guy, when the bad guys overrun your neighborhood, don't call us.
You're still going to call us. It's just the knowledge, the ability to solve that problem isn't going to be there.
Yeah.
One of the things that came out of this, and I don't know how it worked in other states, was California lost our gang database, or a whole lot of our gang database, out of concerns about too many people of one ethnicity or another being in the gang database. When you looked at the criteria for entry in it, if they were there, they earned their way onto that list.
Exactly.
But when we lost all the criminal intelligence, when we lost a lot of that database, it's a lot harder to figure out what dude was with an area code tattooed over his left eyeball and these words on his knuckles. It's a lot harder to find that guy in the suspect description if we lose that. One of the other things, and I'll kind of tie this to aviation for some folks. If you remember back to Top Gun, the original Top Gun, the really cool movie when we were like in our late teens, early 20s, they talked about one of the reasons why the Top Gun school was formed was they found that if you could get through your first X number of encounters, you had a much greater likely chance of surviving in aerial combat against an enemy. So how did they do that? They gave you those encounters at the fighter weapons school rather than flying off of an aircraft carrier over a hostile country. If your cops aren't getting exposed to high-risk events, either in training or practical application, they're not getting the experience on how to handle those, and they're not getting the exposure. And lack of experience and lack of exposure cuts down on your positive outcomes.
Yep, absolutely. So you can support what you support, but if you don't support law enforcement, you're going to get what you want, and you're not going to like it. So, Erick, thank you so much. As usual, I guess street lingo comes up against your highly educated talk. You put things far better than I do, but I think we both got the point across. So,
and I was just going to say, I'm still working. I still work part-time in the law enforcement system. Yeah. So there might be a time or two I have to couch some of the things I say, and I'll let you go ahead at those points.
Okay. I'm very passionate about this idea that we have to support law enforcement. And the thing is, we ought to put this disclaimer in here. I don't support dirty cops. I've met very few, but they are out there. There's the guys that are too force heavy. There's, just plain corrupt ones, but they are the tiniest majority. And there's nothing a good cop hates worse than a bad cop, because you're soiling us all. So law enforcement is pretty decent in most places, in most cases of cleaning things up. But as a whole, if as a society we ever stop supporting cops, it's going to be really ugly. And all you need to do is go to some major cities and see what's happened there. And you hear the term war zone being thrown about a lot more.
And one thing, it popped into my head while you were saying it. I was an association vice president for about 3.5 years, an employee association. We had about 250 sworn deputies at the time. There's a lot of things that get said about law enforcement associations and what they do and don't do. And that's a topic for another day, because I hear moves to ban them, take away employee rights, take away officers' rights in the criminal system. That's not where the failings are. It's
a crazy time. I can't imagine I'd ever see, but in closing, I liken it to maybe 1972. Many people spit on and looked down upon our returning Vietnam veterans. And now not suddenly, but over the course of years, we've come to appreciate the sacrifices they've made, and we hold them up. And unfortunately, now law enforcement's down in that hole. So I'm hoping when things come around, eventually people will realize, yeah, we really do need these guys and gals. And if you are one of those guys and gals, or whatever gender you choose to proclaim, keep doing it. I think the majority of the country is still behind you. And we certainly are here at FMG, Guns Magazine, and AmericanCop.com. So any closing thoughts, Erick?
Take the time to listen. Actually listen to what happened. Try not to go off the headline. Try not to go off the soundbite. Talk to your cops. What are they actually getting training wise? Right. This is for the decent, normal human beings out there. What are they getting training wise? Talk to the chief. Talk to the city council. How are they working on getting better at doing what they do? Right. By the same token, agencies, let's take the time to explain to people what's going on. No comment doesn't fly. It hasn't been flying for probably 8-10 years, and quite frankly, it shouldn't have been flying during most of my career.
Yeah.
Take the time to learn from events. I just listened to a podcast about a shooting down in Florida where they shot up a UPS truck that had been carjacked, and the UPS driver was killed inside the shooting. And if you look at that shooting, it's a really hard one to explain, and I'm not ever going to try it. But how did that agency train their officers? How many of the officers down there knew about the Norco bank robbery in the 80s and the mobile gunfight that went on? How many of them had been to a debrief on Stockton, California bank robbery, pursuit, and shootout, and learned some of the lessons from that, right? And a lot of this stuff isn't new. We just have to have competent street officers and supervisors who are paying attention to what's happened before and are doing a better job of responding to these events.
Excellent advice. And I don't think you intended to, but you had a great segue. We just talked 2 episodes ago, the episode number 115 of the Guns Magazine podcast, with Vince Bancroft. Sorry, Vince. He was working LAPD on the North Hollywood shootout where over 2,000 rounds were fired, and it makes some pretty compelling audio. So check that out at the Guns Magazine podcast. Well, Erick, thank you very much for your time. I encourage folks to check out AmericanCop.com, whether you are law enforcement or you're just a normal Earth person who's concerned about all these issues and want to be practical.
Thank you.
You'll be hearing more from Erick now that he's officially part of our team, and I'm looking forward to hearing his insights on a variety of topics. And with that, I hope you're enjoying the Guns Magazine podcast. Guns Magazine was first on the newsstand, and today we're bringing you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you've got any questions or comments about the show, please email me. That would be editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast directory, YouTube, and of course at gunsmagazine.com. And while you're online, don't forget to check out our great sister publications, American Handgunner Magazine at AmericanHandgunner.com, of course AmericanCop.com, and our numerous special editions available on our websites. Most of all, while you're online, I'd also appreciate it if you'd share a favorite episode or some kind words on your own social media. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For the entire staff at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent T. Now get out there and get shooting.